Right, imagine this. You're sitting in your house, scrolling through your phone, maybe ordering takeout. Now rewind 5,000 years. There's no electricity, no cities as you know them, no written language. Just nomads wandering about looking for their next meal. Fast forward a few centuries, and suddenly there are massive cities, legal codes, and people writing down their shopping lists on clay tablets. What happened? The Middle East happened. This tiny strip of land connecting 3 continents became the birthplace of pretty much everything we take for granted today. Writing, cities, laws, mathematics, 3 major world religions. It all kicked off here. But here's the thing, this same region that gave us civilization has also been the epicenter of some of history's bloodiest conflicts. So how did we get from inventing the wheel to endless wars over oil and religion? Buckle up, because we're about to tear through 5,000 years of Middle Eastern history, and trust me, it's absolutely mental. Let's start at the very beginning. Late 4th millennium BC, southern Mesopotamia, that's modern-day Iraq, by the way. The Sumerians are doing something revolutionary. They're ditching the nomadic lifestyle and settling down permanently, building the world's first proper cities. We're talking about places like Uruk and Ur, with thousands of people living together, working together, trading together. They invent writing cuneiform, pressed into wet clay, so they can keep track of who owes what to whom. They create complex bureaucracies and legal codes. Basically, they're inventing civilization as we know it. Meanwhile, just to the west, ancient Egypt's getting its act together around 3150 BC, unifying under the pharaohs. Together, these 2 powerhouses define what historians call the Fertile Crescent, this arc of land stretching from Mesopotamia through the Levant down to the Nile. It's genuinely the cradle of civilization, and for good reason. Everything's happening here first, but empires don't last forever, do they? The Sumerian city-states eventually give way to the Akkadian Empire around 2400 BC. Then come the Babylonians with their famous law code, an eye for an eye and all that. Then the Assyrians, who are absolutely terrifying militarily and dominate the region for over 1,500 years. They're brilliant administrators but also ruthlessly violent when anyone steps out of line. Over in the Levanten corridor, the Phoenicians are doing their own thing, establishing maritime trading cities and, crucially, developing an early alphabet. This alphabet becomes the foundation for Greek, Latin, and eventually the alphabet you're reading right now. So yeah, even our ABCs come from the Middle East. Then, in the 6th century BC, everything changes. Cyrus the Great founds the Achaemenid Persian Empire and goes on an absolute rampage, conquering Mesopotamia, Egypt, and huge chunks of West Asia. For the first time ever, all these disparate regions are united under one massive imperial system. It's a pivotal moment, setting the template for empires to come. But here's where it gets interesting. Enter Alexander the Great in 334 BC. This Macedonian upstart invades and topples the entire Persian Empire in just a few years. He dies young in 323 BC, and his empire immediately fragments, but the damage is done, or rather the transformation is done. Greek culture floods into the Middle East. You get Hellenistic kingdoms like the Seleucids in Syria and Mesopotamia, and the Ptolemies in Egypt. Cities like Alexandria and Antioch become cosmopolitan hubs where Greek philosophy mingles with local traditions. It's a fusion that bridges East and West, and it lasts for centuries. As these Hellenistic kingdoms decline, guess who's knocking at the door? Rome. By the 1st century BC, Rome's extending its reach into the eastern Mediterranean, gradually annexing Asia Minor, the Levant, and Egypt. The Pax Romana brings 2 centuries of relative peace, economic integration, and infrastructure development. Roads, aqueducts, the whole lot. And then, during Roman rule, something absolutely massive happens. Christianity emerges in 1st century Judea as a reformist movement within Judaism. Despite brutal persecution initially, it spreads like wildfire. By the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine converts, issues the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance, and founds Constantinople as a new capital in 330 AD. By century's end, Christianity's the official religion of the entire Roman Empire. The cultural and spiritual landscape of the Middle East is completely transformed. Now, Rome's hold on the region is never absolute. From the 3rd to 7th centuries, the Eastern Roman Empire, we call it Byzantine now, with its capital at Constantinople, is locked in near-constant conflict with a revitalized Persian state, the Sasanian Empire. These two superpowers carve up the Middle East between them. Byzantines hold Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt. Sasanians control Iran, Mesopotamia, and bits of the Arabian frontier. They fight and fight and fight, culminating in a devastating war from 602 to 628 AD that leaves both empires absolutely knackered. Militarily exhausted, politically unstable, ripe for the taking. And that's when everything changes again. Early 7th century, Arabian Peninsula. A revolutionary religious and political movement emerges. Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, born in Mecca around 570 AD, starts preaching in 610, delivering a message of strict monotheism and social justice that draws from and reinterprets earlier Jewish and Christian traditions. He unites the Arab tribes in a way that's never happened before. When he dies in 632, his successors, the caliphs, launch astonishingly swift conquests. Within 2 decades, Muslim forces take Syria and Palestine from Byzantine control, Egypt by 642, and completely dismantle the Sasanian state by 651. The Rashidun Caliphate becomes a dominant imperial power stretching from North Africa to the borders of India. This isn't just military conquest, it's a civilizational turning point. Islam becomes a unifying religious identity. Arabic becomes the administrative language, gradually replacing Greek, Aramaic, and Persian. Most of the region's population eventually speaks Arabic and adheres to Islam, though Christian and Jewish minorities continue living under Islamic rule with protected but legally distinct status. The Islamic world enters a golden age. The Umayyad Caliphate, established in 661 with Damascus as capital, presides over an empire stretching from Spain to the Indus River. They build stunning monuments like the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. But internal tensions simmer, and in 750, the Abbasids overthrow them and establish a new dynasty with Baghdad as capital. Under Abbasid rule, things get properly brilliant. Baghdad becomes a global center of learning, trade, and culture. The House of Wisdom in the early 9th century becomes a hub where scholars translate Greek philosophical and scientific texts into Arabic, preserving classical knowledge and massively expanding it. Advances in mathematics, algebra, algorithms, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, literature. It's a synthesis of Arab, Persian, Hellenistic, and Indian influences producing innovations from Arabic numerals to literary classics. This is Islam's golden age, and it's genuinely glorious, but by the 10th century, unity's fragmenting. The empire's too big to govern effectively. Regional dynasties assert autonomy. Persian regimes like the Buyids dominate Iran and Iraq. Turkish warlords like the Seljuks rise in the 11th century. Rival caliphates emerge. The Fatimids in Egypt establish a Shia regime, directly challenging Abbasid supremacy. Sectarian divisions deepen. This fragmentation exposes the Islamic world to new threats. Late 11th century. Feudal lords and knights from Western Europe launch the Crusades, religiously motivated invasions establishing several short-lived crusader states in the Levant. Muslim resistance gradually intensifies. Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty recaptures Jerusalem in 1187. Eventually, the Mamluks of Egypt defeat the final crusader strongholds by 1291, but an even more devastating threat emerges from the east. The Mongols. In 1258, Mongol armies sack Baghdad, destroying the city and bringing the Abbasid Caliphate to a catastrophic end. The destruction of Baghdad, the intellectual and cultural heart of the Islamic world, is a turning point. The Mongols ravage Persia and Mesopotamia, but their advance into the Levant is halted in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut by the Mamluks. In the aftermath, the Middle East remains politically fragmented. Mamluks rule Egypt and Syria. Mongols establish the Ilkhanate in Persia. In Anatolia, the Seljuk Empire collapses, giving way to smaller Turkish principalities. Among these, one rises to prominence: the Ottomans. Founded by Turkish chieftain Osman around 1300, the Ottomans start small but expand steadily. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II captures Constantinople, renaming it Istanbul. It's a symbolic end to the Christian Roman Empire in the East and establishes the Ottomans as the premier Islamic power. In 1516 to 1517, they defeat the Mamluks, bringing Egypt, Syria, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman control. By the mid-16th century under Suleiman the Magnificent, The Ottoman Empire reaches its zenith, controlling Anatolia, most of the Arab world, and much of southeastern Europe. It's a vast multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire reintroducing imperial unity not seen since Abbasid times. But this period also entrenches new divisions. Early 16th century, the Safavid dynasty arises in Persia, establishing Shia Islam as state religion and forming an ideologically opposed polity to the Sunni Ottomans. This Ottoman-Safavid rivalry shapes regional politics and sectarian identities well into the modern era, forming roots of enduring Sunni-Shia divisions. During the 16th and 17th centuries, the Ottomans stand among the world's most powerful states, controlling key trade routes and major cities thriving as centers of commerce and culture. But by the late 17th and into the 18th century, relative decline sets in. Internally, corruption, economic stagnation, bureaucratic inefficiency. Externally, European powers, Austria, Russia, Britain, France, erode Ottoman territory and influence. The empire earns the moniker the sick man of Europe. Reform efforts called the Tanzimat are launched in the 19th century to modernize the army, administration, and society along European lines. Some successes, but they fail to reverse strategic decline. Meanwhile, European imperial ambitions intensify. Britain establishes control in the Persian Gulf and gains influence in Egypt, especially after the Suez Canal construction in 1869. Persia remains formally independent, but comes under pressure from Russia and Britain. The discovery of oil in 1908 marks a turning point, inaugurating the petroleum age and drawing further Western interest. The Ottoman Empire's final demise comes with World War I. The reformist Young Turks lead the empire into alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Disaster. Fighting on multiple fronts, suffering devastating defeats. Arab leaders, particularly Sharif Hussein of Mecca, negotiate with Britain and launch a revolt against the Ottomans in 1916. Promised support for an independent Arab kingdom after the war. But here's where it gets dodgy. These promises conflict with other secret agreements. The 1917 Balfour Declaration sees Britain support establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, negotiated secretly between Britain and France, outlines plans to divide Ottoman Arab provinces into zones of influence. By war's end, the Ottomans are defeated and the empire collapses. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 formalizes dismemberment. Though the Turkish War of Independence soon leads to the Republic of Turkey's foundation in 1923 under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. In the wake of WWI, the modern Middle East is shaped by European colonial powers. The League of Nations grants mandates legitimizing British and French control under the pretense of preparing territories for independence. Britain gains mandates over Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine. France takes Syria and Lebanon. These artificial borders are drawn with little regard for the region's complex ethnic, tribal, and sectarian realities, sowing seeds for conflicts erupting later in the 20th century. The Arabian Peninsula follows a different trajectory. Britain recognizes the Al Saud family's rule over Central Arabia. Following their conquest of rival territories, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is established in 1932. In Palestine, contradictory promises to Jews and Arabs result in growing tensions. Increased Jewish immigration following the Balfour Declaration leads to escalating conflict, foreshadowing the eventual crisis. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, European powers maintained dominance. But anti-colonial sentiment and nationalism rise steadily. Iraq experiences uprisings and gains nominal independence in 1932, though Britain retains influence. Egypt, technically independent since 1922, remains under de facto British control. This interwar period witnesses the emergence of Pan-Arabism, advocating for political unification of Arab peoples and nationalist parties seeking self-determination. With World War II's outbreak in 1939, the Middle East becomes strategically vital again. The war strains European imperial capacity and raises nationalist expectations. By conflict's end, European colonialism is crumbling, and momentum for independence is unstoppable. The first decolonization wave between 1945 and 1950 sees Britain and France withdraw from Syria, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Iraq. In 1948, Britain completes its withdrawal from Palestine. But that departure precipitates one of modern history's most enduring conflicts. The UN votes to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. Jewish leadership accepts. Arab leaders reject it. When Israel declares independence in May 1948, neighboring Arab states invade, triggering the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Israel not only survives but expands its territory. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs are displaced, becoming refugees. This deepens Arab resentment and solidifies a conflict recurring repeatedly in following decades. Post-war years see profound political transformation as colonial powers retreat and new nation-states emerge under post-colonial ideologies, especially Pan-Arabism. The most prominent proponent is Gamal Abdel Nasser, rising to power in Egypt after a 1952 military coup. Nasser's vision of Arab unity, socialism, and anti-imperialism resonates widely. His nationalization of the Suez Canal in 1956 and the ensuing crisis, when Britain, France, and Israel invade Egypt, elevate Nasser's status as a regional hero. International pressure forces invaders to withdraw, signaling the effective end of traditional European imperialism in the region. Yet Pan-Arabism ultimately falters. Ideological disunity, regional rivalries, poor economic outcomes, and critically, failure to resolve the Palestinian question lead to disillusionment. This sense of failure is exacerbated after the 1967 Six-Day War, in which Israel decisively defeats Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, occupying Gaza Strip, West Bank, Golan Heights, and Sinai Peninsula. The scale and speed of defeat discredit Arab nationalist regimes and fuel the rise of Palestinian nationalism led increasingly by Yasser Arafat and the PLO. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched the Yom Kippur War attempting to reclaim lost territories. Despite early gains, the war ends in stalemate. But the most significant consequence is a global oil crisis, triggered by an Arab oil embargo on countries supporting Israel. This underscores the Middle East's growing economic and geopolitical importance as oil becomes central to global power dynamics. Then, 1979 brings two seismic events permanently reshaping the region. First, Egypt under President Anwar Sadat becomes the first Arab country making peace with Israel, signing the Camp David Accords and regaining Sinai in exchange for diplomatic recognition. Second, and more consequential long-term, is the Iranian Revolution. The overthrow of the Western-backed Shah and establishment of an Islamic republic under Ayatollah Khomeini introduces a radical model of political Islam. The revolution ruptures relations with the U.S. and challenges secular Arab regimes and Sunni monarchies, igniting new ideological rivalry. In response, Iraq's Saddam Hussein invades Iran in 1980, initiating the Iran-Iraq War. The conflict is brutal and inconclusive, lasting 8 years and causing massive casualties. Iraq emerges economically crippled, heavily indebted to Gulf Arab states, especially Kuwait. In 1990, seeking to erase war debts and control more oil reserves, Iraq invades Kuwait. This provokes the Gulf War as a U.S.-led coalition swiftly intervenes and expels Iraqi forces in 1991. Though militarily successful, the war marks the beginning of prolonged U.S. military presence in the region, amplifying perceptions of Western imperial overreach, particularly among Islamist groups. By the turn of the millennium, this deepening U.S. presence is increasingly resented, seen as an affront to sovereignty and enabler of authoritarian regimes. This resentment helps fuel radical Islamist ideology, culminating in the 9/11 attacks in 2001 by al-Qaeda. The attacks prompt the US-led war on terror, turning the Middle East into its epicenter. After invading Afghanistan, the U.S. invades Iraq in 2003 under the pretext of eliminating weapons of mass destruction. While Saddam's regime collapses quickly, Iraq descends into sectarian conflict, creating fertile ground for extremist movements. This regional instability sets the stage for the Arab Spring in 2011, a wave of popular uprisings demanding democratic reform and an end to authoritarian rule. Beginning in Tunisia, it quickly spreads to Egypt, Libya, Syria, and beyond. Although Tunisia transitions to democracy, most outcomes are bleak. Egypt's democratic experiment is short-lived, ending in a 2013 military coup. Libya and Yemen descend into chaos. In Syria, President Bashar al-Assad's refusal to relinquish power leads to devastating civil war displacing millions and becoming a proxy war involving Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Western powers. Amid this chaos, ISIS emerges, drawing strength from disaffected Sunni communities and post-occupation Iraq's ruins. Declaring a caliphate in 2014, seizing large territories in Iraq and Syria, committing widespread atrocities, and using online propaganda to recruit worldwide. By 2017, a combination of forces succeeds in dismantling the group's territorial control, though it continues operating as a regional insurgency. Throughout the 21st century, significant geopolitical realignments occur. Iran expands influence across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen through militias and proxy groups, forming a strategic corridor often dubbed the Shia Crescent. This challenges Sunni powers, particularly Saudi Arabia and Gulf allies, who view Iran's growing reach as a direct threat. Iran's nuclear program, long a point of international contention, further heightens tensions. Meanwhile, Turkey under Recep Tayyip Erdogan reasserts regional ambitions, pursuing independent foreign policy, deploying troops in Syria, Libya, and the Caucasus. These competing spheres of influence between Iran, Turkey, and Arab Gulf states shape a more multipolar Middle East with shifting alliances and persistent rivalry. Amidst these rivalries, however, some Arab states begin re-evaluating positions. In 2020, under U.S. mediation, the Abraham Accords are signed, seeing UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco normalize relations with Israel. Shared concerns over Iran and frustration with the Israeli-Palestinian stalemate are key motivations, marking a significant shift in regional diplomacy. As of today, the Middle East remains a complex and contested geopolitical landscape. While some states, particularly in the Gulf, have seen rapid modernization and economic growth through oil wealth, tourism, and investment, others remain plagued by authoritarianism, corruption, and conflict. Deep-rooted sectarian, ethnic, and political rivalries persist, and the legacy of foreign intervention continues shaping popular attitudes and regional alignments. So there you have it, 5,000 years condensed into 20 minutes. From Sumerian clay tablets to ISIS propaganda videos. From the invention of writing to arguments over who controls the oil. The Middle East gave birth to civilization as we know it. Cities, laws, mathematics, three of the world's major religions. But it's also been the stage for some of humanity's bloodiest conflicts, shaped by empires rising and falling, foreign interventions, artificial borders, and deep sectarian divides that refuse to heal. The region remains at a crossroads, rich in potential yet burdened by a history of division, intervention, and unfulfilled aspirations. And honestly, that story's far from over. If you found this whirlwind tour through Middle Eastern history as fascinating as I did putting it together, give this video a like. Subscribe for more deep dives into the regions and events that shaped our world. And drop a comment. What part of Middle Eastern history do you want to know more about? Because trust me, we've only scratched the surface. Cheers.